What is up and how's it going? And in this training, we are going to be covering the second half of intuitive eating, right? So far we've covered eating slowly as one of your foundational habits. We've covered eating to 80% as one of your foundational habits. And then lastly, we covered eating while hungry and eating mindfully. So now we're going to start to dive into these last two on here to cover, which again, these are our primary 6 pillars of intuitive eating. So these last two here are eating real foods as often as possible and eating balanced meals as often as possible. We're just going to go ahead and dive in here, and we're going to start with eating real foods as often as possible. So why do we want to eat real foods? And what the heck do I even mean when I say real foods, right? Real foods are foods that are either not processed or minimally processed. It is 2022, so it's hard to eat a diet completely free of anything processed. And, sometimes it's more convenient to grab things on the go, but this is majority of the time, right? Majority of the time you want to be reaching for real foods for your snacks, for your meals, for anything, right? So real foods allows you to essentially this second point on here, right? Be in complete control of what's going into your body. So if you are eating something that's processed, or eating even like foods out at restaurants and meals out at restaurants, you really don't have absolute and 100% control about what's going in your body. Processed foods, highly processed foods, are typically higher in added salts, added sugars, stabilizers, like so that they can keep on a shelf for long periods of time, and oils, right? Processed foods tend to be higher in hydrogenated vegetable oils, which can be inflammatory in the body. Whereas if you are making foods at home, you can control the amounts of salts and sodium that you're using. You can control the amounts of added sugar, right? Things like sauces have an overwhelming amount of added sugar and you wouldn't even know it. And again, you can also keep things free from stabilizers and preservatives, as well as choosing lower inflammatory oils such as avocado oil or coconut oil, and staying away from, again, hydrogenated vegetable oils. Also in real foods versus processed foods, micronutrients, phytonutrients, adaptogens, antioxidants, etc. Those things are higher and more readily available in a processed food, and it is easier for your body to break down versus in a processed food. It's also higher in fiber, right? An apple versus a granola bar, it just offers so much more to your body that is, again, like I said, readily available. So it's higher in micronutrients, phytonutrients, antioxidants, adaptogens, etc. All of that is higher in real foods, higher in fiber versus a processed foods, where some of those things are stripped due to like just the processing that happens with it. Some of that's lost along its way. So what are real foods? This means things that you make at home. For example, a homemade hummus versus a store-bought hummus. Although hummus is not highly processed, it's still minimally processed. This is making a homemade ice cream out of, bananas versus buying Ben & Jerry's with 56 grams of sugar added to it. This means, infusing water at home with some lemons, strawberries, and cucumber versus buying a juice with added sugars in it, right? So foods that are typically made at home. So obviously, yes, if it's, like a stir fry that has lots of ingredients, right? Homemade. So things that you make at home with little to no ingredients. So obviously a whole food as is, an apple, the only ingredient is an apple. Chicken, the only ingredient is chicken. Corn, the only ingredient is corn, right? So we want no ingredients or little ingredients. So when I think of little ingredients, I'm thinking of things like a Lara bar, where there's minimal ingredients. There might be 4 ingredients in a Lara bar, or like an applesauce where it only has salt added, something like that, right? So where we are eating foods that either no ingredients or low ingredients to stay minimally processed if we are going to have processed. as well as if there are ingredients in the food that you're eating, making sure that these are ingredients that you recognize, right? There's some pretty funky stuff out there if you're looking at a nutrition label. So you want to either look to have one ingredient, or if there are several ingredients, keeping them minimal ingredients and also whole foods ingredients. And then third, you also want to keep in mind, do I recognize the stuff that is on this nutrition label listed under ingredients? Just skim it. Like, you'd be surprised. There's a huge difference between going and picking up a fresh baked bread, like a loaf of bread from a local bakery, versus going and picking up, whatever loaf of white bread, right? There might be ingredients on there you don't even recognize. So I'm not saying don't eat bread. I'm saying choose a higher quality with minimal ingredients and clear ingredients that you know exactly what it is that you are putting into your body. Rule of thumb is, does this food come from the earth, not a factory? If it's come from a factory, it's processed. Now, I understand that gets a little gray, because then you run into things like olive oil, right? I would consider olive oil a whole food. However, it's extremely processed because it has to go through a process, like processing, to make it become oil from a fruit, right? So rule of thumb is like, does this actually come from the earth? Does it grow in the earth? Does it grow on a tree? Does it grow in the earth versus a factory, right? Things that come from a factory, crackers, like crackers, breads, bars, etc. Like, those things are coming from a factory. So those are going to be more processed foods. And then two more things I'm here to cover is to shop the outside aisles at the grocery store. This one's pretty straightforward, but if you go to the grocery store, you'll notice all the fresh foods, right? The eggs, the meat, the seafood, the produce, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, like all of that stuff is on the outside aisles of the grocery store. I understand there are some exceptions where you might want to go into the aisles, like tea, coffee, nuts, things like that are typically on the inside aisles. But general rule of thumb is to stick to shopping on the outside of the grocery store, the outside aisles. That's where you're going to typically find your more whole foods, because they do need to be refrigerated, right? Or at least so just stick to the outside aisles. And then lastly, this isn't the end all be all. You do not need to eat a 100% whole foods diet in order to be healthier, in order to lose weight, in order to follow intuitive eating guidelines. You want to eat whole, real foods as often as possible, but understand that, like, you don't have to be 100% perfect. It's okay to grab a protein bar if you're on the go, and it's either, stop at Wawa and grab chicken fingers or a protein bar, there's whatever. So it doesn't have to be perfect 100% of the time, but just as often as possible, you want to gravitate towards real foods. So to recap there, we want to eat real foods because they are they're higher in micronutrients, phytonutrients, fiber, etc. And those things are more readily available in whole foods versus processed foods. And then also because you can be more in control of the food that's coming into your body, making sure that you're limiting hydrogenated vegetable oils, salts, sugars, stabilizers, and preservatives. So moving on now to our last and final, and don't worry, we still have lots to cover, but our last and final pillar of intuitive eating. So in order to eat intuitively, we are eating slowly, we are eating to 80%, we are eating when we are hungry, eating mindfully, eating real foods as often as possible. And then this last one is also another, as often as possible. So the sixth one is to eat balanced meals as often as possible. So when I say balanced, I just mean we want to make sure that we're not massively under eating or overeating any major macronutrient or area of like nutrition, right? The gut microbiome thrives off of diversity, right? So making sure that we are getting a well-rounded array of micronutrients into the body, array of all other things that food brings our body. And so to do so, making sure we are eating balanced macros as much as possible. That means we're not under eating on protein. I see a lot of women that come into my high-level customized nutrition coaching program, and they are severely under eating protein. We're talking 40 grams, we're talking like 30 grams a day to 80 grams a day of protein, which is far too little. So eating balanced means we're getting healthy fats, we are getting healthy, easily digestible carbohydrates into into our diet, and we are also getting protein. So what exactly is a balanced meal? A balanced meal is where you do include each macronutrient. And again, this is as often as possible. If you are eating 4 times a day, do you need to have 4 perfectly balanced meals? No. But just in general, as you're thinking about this, and this is a great rule of thumb because this is intuitive eating, right? We're not here to be counting calories, to be counting macros when you're following intuitive eating. But this allows you to go out to that dinner party or go to that potluck party and know that you can still have a balanced meal by following balanced macros. So what that basically looks like is, we'll call it, 40% of your diet coming from carbohydrates, as your body's main energy source is carbohydrates. And then we'll call it 30% from fat, 30% from protein, right? And you can even kind of bring that in a little bit more. And it's also going to depend on your preferences, your body type, etc. It's going to depend on your goals. It's going to depend on what you have access to. But, essentially whatever your macronutrient distribution is, and those are things you can play around with and figure out what works best for you. But let's just call balanced as 40, 30, 30, where carbs are slightly higher, because again, that's going to be your body's main source of energy and main source of fuel. So one, and the serving size is 1 to 2, because we want to make sure, again, we're going based off of your goals. If your goals are weight loss, maybe right now you're doing 2 servings of protein, 1 serving of fat, and 1 serving of a carbohydrate per meal, right? And you can kind of play around with it, but essentially we're shooting for 1 to 2 servings of protein with every single meal that you have. We are shooting for 1 to 2 servings of fat, of healthy dietary fat, with every single meal that you have, and 1 to 2 servings of carbohydrates. So I know that things can also get a little bit tricky, right? Because most foods tend to have, like, if you look at a nutrition label for something, like, again, let's pick an RX bar, for example. An RX bar is going to have grams listed in protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So you can just kind of classify things as maybe where the higher grams is. So if you look at the nutrition label for let's just say, you buy a store-bought potato salad. There's going to be grams of protein, there's going to be grams of fat, but the grams of carbohydrates is the highest grams listed. So you can kind of classify potatoes, right, as a carbohydrate. So eating balanced meals, last pillar here. Protein, fat, and carbohydrates included with each meal as much as possible. So we're going to go ahead and talk about each of these macronutrients. Why does our body need each of these macronutrients, and how can we get these macronutrients, right? I believe in the value of education and understanding why somebody is telling you what they are telling you to do with your body. So why do we need protein? Essentially, right, I'm sure you've heard in, your biology class in eighth grade, right? Protein provides the building blocks for your body, right? So for building muscle mass, if your goals are to build muscle, you need protein. If your goals are to lose weight, you still need protein. It's the highest satiating macronutrient, so it's going to keep you fullest longer. And you also want to make sure that when you are losing weight, that you are maintaining the muscle that you have, and or obviously gaining the muscle that you have, but you don't want to be losing weight and losing muscle, especially if you're a female, and especially if you're a female over the age of 30. It's very easy. It's kind of one of those, if you don't use it, you lose it type concepts with your muscle mass and with your bone density. As early as age 30, as a female, you can start to lose bone density and muscle mass. So even if you are losing weight, it's going to be still extremely important to make sure that you are getting protein in with every single meal that you have, to make sure that you are maintaining and or building your muscle mass. So next thing on here is that it's obviously going to help us recover and grow from our workouts, right? When you go and you lift weights, what's happening at in the myofascial system is you're getting tiny little micro tears in the tissue, and those tissues are building themselves back up. And then you go and lift weights again, and you're getting tiny little micro tears to the myofascial system, and they are building yourselves back up. And we need protein to help synthesize and make that process move forward. So to help recover, if you're somebody who hits a workout and you stay sore for 5 days, 6 days, you're likely not getting balanced macronutrients, and or stress is probably too high, and your sleep is probably not where it needs to be. But nonetheless, we want to make sure we are getting protein in to help recover from our workouts. Then on like the aesthetics side of things, right? We talked about bone density a little bit previously already, but muscles, skin, hair, and nails, and we also talked about this as well on here. So your body needs to preserve its bone density and muscle mass and recover from workouts. So protein is going to help with that. As well as I had also mentioned, protein is the highest satiating macronutrient. So if you are, again, for example, if you are trying to lose weight, and that means you're pushing your comfort zone a little bit in between meals. Maybe you're used to eating a meal every 3 hours, but now you're shooting for every 4 hours, and you feel yourself feeling hungrier. You are going to absolutely 100% want to make sure you're having protein with your meals because it is the highest satiating macronutrient, right? If you just have a salad with nothing else, no seeds, no nuts, no chicken, no tofu, no tempeh, nothing. It's just like lettuce and it's just vegetables and fruit. You are going to be hungry again sooner, right? Well, technically, meals high in fat, high in protein, and high in fiber, because the fiber is going to fill your belly, right? Think of 100 calories of M&Ms compared to 100 calories of broccoli, right? 100 calories of broccoli is going to take up more space in your stomach than 100 calories of M&Ms is. So it's going to keep you fuller longer. So again, protein is the highest satiating macronutrient. So it's really important, especially if you are trying to lose weight and lower your caloric intake, to be having high protein. Lastly, it's important in metabolism, immune system, and hormone production and regulation. So how can you get protein in your diet? A lot of this stuff isn't rocket science. I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of this, but I think a lot of it just comes down to intentionality, especially if you are vegan, vegetarian, or any form of plant-based. You have to be very diligent in asking yourself, like, where is my protein intake coming this meal? And you also have to be very diligent if you are somebody that goes out to eat or goes to socialize or goes out to dinner with friends regularly, and you're not going to be going to places where there are great protein options for you as a vegan or vegetarian, or again, any form of plant-based. You have to be really extra intentional to make sure you're doubling up at breakfast, doubling up at lunch, and then going out for dinner and having a high protein snack, right? We do want to make sure that we are getting about 30%, give or take, 5 or 10% of our intake from protein. So different forms of protein, obviously meat, poultry, right? So beef, bison, lamb, pork, chicken, turkey, duck, fish, and seafood, as well as eggs and egg whites. Egg whites are a sneaky way of adding your protein in. The half carton containers, there's a full carton and the half carton. The whole thing, 50 grams of protein. Boom. You have half that at breakfast, half that at lunch on your salad. You've just added 50 grams of protein plus whatever else you have. And then obviously you have your things like your cottage cheese, your yogurt, cheeses in general, nuts, seeds, over here. Yep. So we have that list continued: protein powders, lentils, beans, nuts, seeds, and then plant-based tempeh, tofu, edamame, and minimally processed meat. So a couple things I do want to touch base on here from this list of protein sources is I did say here, if you're going to be having yogurts or anything like that, or kefir or anything like that for your protein, keep in mind that you want to shoot for, I would say, probably about less than 8 grams of added sugar or less, right? Some of these things like yogurt is going to have naturally occurring sugar, but you want to shoot for less than 8 grams of added sugar, less than 8 to 10, if possible. It's just going to make sure you're not getting that added sugar. Added sugar is terrible for your blood sugar. It's terrible for your liver. It's not great for your body at all. So that's my side note there. And then 2 other quick side notes here for protein is same thing for protein powders. Just like make sure you're reading the label, make sure there's not sneaky added sugars, opt for organic when and where possible and as often as possible. And then minimally processed meats, right? So choosing, if you're getting a pizza, obviously that's, you have your pizza every once in a while, but if you're having pizza and you want meat on it, opt for the chicken and not the what's it called, pepperoni. If you're having a sandwich for lunch, opt for the turkey, not for the pastrami, right? Processed meats are carcinogenic. They are absolutely terrible for your body. They are inflammatory, and I would highly recommend, again, those are processed, right? Going back to the concept of real foods versus processed foods. I would highly recommend staying clear from processed meats and opting for lean, organic, free range, no growth hormones added, no antibiotics added forms of meat. And then another note here for this tempeh, tofu, and edamame. Those are foods that are higher in estrogen. So again, if you are a female and you are getting your periods regularly, you're going to want to do tempeh, tofu, and edamame. Those are things you're going to want to do in your follicular phase, which means the week or so after your period, because those are going to be things that are going to help you boost your estrogen levels back up. But you want to be kind of staying away from those types of things during your ovulation when your estrogen is already high. You don't want to be adding to that. So that's also just something to think about there. So that is it for proteins. Next, we'll move on to carbohydrates. So again, we'll touch base on why do we need to consume carbohydrates. As I mentioned already, carbohydrates are your body's primary source of energy. So you are, right, we've got different energy systems. You've got, I'm sure you've heard like anaerobic versus aerobic. We have different energy production systems. We've got a way that your body is generating energy when you are at rest, when you're doing cardio versus when you're strength training versus when you're sprinting. At rest, you are predominantly relying on carbohydrates as your primary source of energy because you're operating from that you're operating in like your cardio state of like energy production. Let's kind of just think of it that way. So your body is relying predominantly, majority of the time, aside from your workouts and whatnot, on carbohydrates as your primary source. So making sure we're getting those, and also provide your body with stored energy. So when you go to hit that heavy leg day, your body's going to hit a point where it maxes out on the tank that it already has, and it's going to transition to pulling to its like reserve. So that's where we want to make sure, we're steadily and regularly and consistently getting high quality carbohydrates in so that we have that stored energy to hit our workouts hard. It also is going to help with preserving muscle. It's also going to help promote digestive health, right? Think for carbohydrates, I want you to think of fruits and veggies as the queen of carbs, right? When you think carbs, I want you to think real foods. So thinking like fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, starches, right? Fruits and vegetables are going to be your queen, the queen of carbs. And then everything else like, a loaf of bread, etc. Those are going to be carbs that you don't like. You want to eat less of. You want to eat more of the fruits and vegetables. So imagine that if you just swapped out some of your processed carbohydrates for whole grain carbohydrates or for fruits and vegetables and cruciferous vegetables, etc., it's going to be much easier for your body to digestively move smoother because you're getting higher fiber. And then as well, carbohydrates are a main source of fuel for your brain, for your kidneys, for your heart, for your central nervous system. Carbohydrates also, right, like we said, in the form of fiber. We also talked about high satiating macronutrients would be high protein, high fats, and high fiber. So carbohydrates typically are going to be higher in fiber as you're getting lots of fruits and veggies, and those are going to help you stay fuller longer. Again, I gave the example of think about next to each other, 100 calories of M&Ms versus 100 calories of broccoli. What's going to keep your belly fuller longer is obviously the more volume of food, which is going to be the broccoli. So also getting this micronutrient dense diversity is going to be great for your gut microbiome, helpful in regulating mood, helpful in regulating blood sugar, and help you gain muscles and improve athletic performance. There's nothing worse than going into a workout hungry. All right, so carbohydrates. As I mentioned, vegetables are queen. If you're choosing between a croissant and an apple, choose the apple. It's going to give you, like I talked about previously, all those readily available micronutrients. So carbohydrates, we want to prioritize these. You can obviously have the processed carbs every so often, but we do want to prioritize vegetables. We do want to prioritize whole grains such as brown or wild rice, oats, quinoa, buckwheat, millet, sorghum, farro, sprouted grains. We want to prioritize beans and legumes. We want to prioritize starchy tubers, right? So your potatoes, your sweet potatoes, go ahead, have those types of things. There's nothing wrong with having potatoes. They do offer a lot of benefits to your body. And then fruit, like fresh fruit or frozen fruit for your smoothies. Last category we have to cover is fats. So why do we need fats in our diets? Fats are important for recovery. They are super important for nourishing the fatty tissues of our brain, our eyes, and our cell membranes. Also amazing for, right, hair, skin, nails, making sure we're prioritizing foods high in omega-3 for healthy hair, healthy skin, healthy nails, make sure we're looking beautiful and sexy. It's great for helping us with the absorption of micronutrients. It's great for helping regulate our hormones, insulating our bodies, and general temperature regulation. And then lastly, energy production, as well as like our second means for energy production, and then protecting our organs and keeping us fuller longer. So what can we have for fats? These are yummy. These are your yummy macronutrients. These are oils, right? We want to stay away from hydrogenated vegetable oils, but keeping olive oils, coconut oils, hemp seed oils, that kind of stuff is going to be great. Grass-fed or free-range butter or ghee, olives, avocado, guac, nuts, seeds, any nut butters are going to be, or dark chocolate as well is not listed on here, but one of my absolute favorites. So pulling this all together, right? Balanced eating. We're going to just cover these things here, and then we're going to wrap up with this training. Balanced eating. I'm going to walk you through hand servings. So if you are not weighing your food, not measuring your food, not counting your macros, you can absolutely just use your hands. So the size of your palm is going to be about the size of the serving of protein. So you want 2 servings of protein, you're going to do 2 servings of your palm. Fat is going to be your thumb. I like to say it's a little bit different because your thumb is like, well, what counts as my thumb? If you're doing oil or something, like the top half of your thumb. If you're doing avocado, like the whole width of your thumb also counts. But again, that's just a way. Hummus, like, the full width, things like that. But you can use your thumb as a guideline. Almonds, line up some almonds along your hand. And then carbohydrates is about a cup of your hand, right? So if you cup your hand like this, that's going to be carbohydrates. And then fruits and veggies are about a fist. So it doesn't matter if you're weighing your food, if you're measuring your food, if you're scanning it in on MyFitnessPal, whatever, you can always base it off of the size of your hands to portion it, right? Again, protein, fat, carbs, fruits, and veggies. Okay. So if you're at home, whether you're out and about, whether you're at a restaurant, whether you're at a barbecue, whether you're at a potluck, it can be simplified. Just simplify it. Do not overcomplicate it, right? So you're at the backyard, you're at the family potluck, let's call it, or you're home for the holidays or whatever it is. Simplify it. Let's get a serving of protein on my meal. Let's get a serving of carbohydrates on my meal. Again, in the form of what we talked about, right? If possible, in the form of these whole foods options. And then let's get some healthy fat on there. Or maybe the vegetables were cooked in oil and it's already taken care of. So simplify it. Your meals don't need to be complicated. And I also say, like, simplify that shit, like truly simplify that shit. You can make any meal. Breakfast, great. Serving of peanut butter, a banana, and 2 eggs. Lunch, spinach, tomatoes for carbohydrates, avocado for healthy fat, chicken for protein, right? Simplify it. Your meals don't need to be complicated, so long as you're getting all of your macronutrients in it. So that about wraps it up for our final training on the intuitive eating overview. And then definitely we have a couple other things I want to dive into as well. I want to talk about grocery shopping with you guys. I want to talk about meal prep with you guys. I have a couple other things I want to dive into. But again, remembering your 6 intuitive eating pillars, which is to eat slowly, eat to 80%, eat when hungry, eat mindfully, eat real food as often as possible, and eat balanced meals as often as possible.